about Jane Eyre?
Jane. Jane Eyre.
Miss Jane Eyre.
Jane. Jane! Jane!
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here we go. What's up? They were talking about Jane Eyre. So Jane Eyre tells the story of a young, intelligent orphan girl who everyone hates for some reason, and her fight against oppressive systems and a society that is hell-bent on keeping her subservient and docile. In the words of Dr. Stevie Davies, who wrote the introduction to the 2006 Penguin Classics edition that I've got right here, Jane's mutiny against her masters catches up the rhetoric of poverty and disease in an industrial world where people starve and are treated like the machines they serve, rather than honored as human beings. It was written by Charlotte Brontë, the eldest of the three Brontë sisters, in 1847 under the pseudonym Currer Bell. And it was a huge, if controversial, success. Reviewers immediately pegged it as a naughty book written by a sexual delinquent, the kind of thing you shouldn't leave out for your daughter to find and read. Nowadays, especially when keeping in mind some of that romantasy stuff that you guys have been reading lately, I'm looking at you. Yes, you. I know you like your Sarah J. Maas. The romance in this book is pretty tame by comparison. These days we read Jane Eyre not so much for the bodice-ripping romance, more so for the richness of the prose, the intimacy of Jane's voice, and the historically progressive feminist politics. As one contemporary reviewer said, the story is unlike all that we have read, with very few exceptions. And for power of thought and expression, we do not know its rival among modern productions. Jane Eyre is told with an articulate and juicy prose style that is characteristically rich, but still surprisingly readable, relatable, and engaging. It's always keeping you grounded in tangible scenes with witty dialogue and interesting action. Her commitment to keeping things engaging and scene-based is also very evident from the opening of chapter 11, where she says, "A new chapter in a novel is something like a new scene in a play." And she honors that structure throughout. But anyway, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. Let's just jump in and dive right into the first chapter of this puppy. Here's Jane Eyre.
Do you know, Jane Eyre, where the wicked go after death?
They go to hell.
And what is hell?
Where are you, Ram?
If you don't sit still, you will be tied down.
Pit full of fire.
The plot of Jane Eyre is structured in accordance with 5 different locations, where Jane progresses from each one, each time a new step in Jane's spiritual journey. We start aptly at Gateshead. Each of the 5 locations is named in a sort of significant way. We've got Gateshead, we've got Lowood, we've got Thornfield, etc., etc. Gateshead is Jane's aunt's house, and she lives there with her cousins, who are super mean to her for no real reason. So we meet Jane one day as she's sitting by the window, she's reading about plants or whatever, and her evil cousins come in and make fun of her for being an orphan. They slap her in the face with a book, and then Jane snaps and fights back. This pattern of Jane being abused and sort of pushed until her breaking point, until she finally breaks and fights back, is a recurring pattern that happens throughout the rest of the novel. The theme of societal repression and the expectations that Jane's peers and superiors are putting on her is a recurring theme throughout the whole novel, and is present as early as the first page, when Mrs. Reed deliberately excludes Jane from spending time with the rest of her family. This is her explanation. "She regretted to be under the necessity of keeping me at a distance, but that until she heard from Bessie and could discover by her own observation that I was endeavoring in good earnest to acquire a more sociable and childlike disposition, a more attractive and sprightly manner, something lighter, franker, more natural, as it were, she really must exclude me from privileges intended only for contented, happy little children." "What does Bessie say I have done?" I asked. Jane, I don't like cavaliers or questioners. Besides, there is something truly forbidding in a child taking up her elders in that manner. Be seated somewhere, and until you can speak pleasantly, remain silent. Until you can speak pleasantly, remain silent. That kind of articulately just puts a big theme of the whole book just right there in one sentence. Versions of this command are going to crop up again and again and again. And as they do, we're going to witness Jane's evolving responses to those commands. So anyway, John Reed sort of beats Jane up, and then Jane, for some reason, gets punished for this, and she gets thrown in the Red Room. As she's being dragged away, she resists, and refers to herself even as a slave, rebelling against her oppressors, driven to go to all lengths to resist. But nevertheless, she's imprisoned in the Red Room. And we get this second chapter, which is almost entirely devoted to Jane's inner contemplation. As critic Sandra M. Gilbert pointed out in her essay Plain Jane's Progress, the Red Room represents the larger society's oppression of Jane. It is a metaphorical prison. After Jane gets imprisoned in the room, we learn that it's the same room where her uncle, Mr. Reed, died some years ago. This is the closest thing to a father figure that Jane has ever had. The room is also literally locked like a prison. No jail was ever so secure, Jane tells us. As she dwells on the injustices of her life, sort of pondering her journey, she also builds up the hauntedness of this room. Why was I always suffering, always browbeaten, always accused, forever condemned? What manner of escape from this horrible prison does Jane possibly have? She contemplates running away, or if that could not be effected, never eating or drinking more, and letting myself die. Escape by flight or starvation end up being recurring motifs also throughout the novel. Anyway, things start to get pretty trippy in this Red Room. And right now is about when I should mention that, rather importantly, Jane Eyre is what's considered a Gothic novel. That just basically means that Charlotte Brontë had ghouls and ghosties on the mind when she was writing this book. There's lots of references to vampires, or characters that slink into the shadows.
I am very, very sneaky, sir.
I see that.
Things like that. So it's along those lines that we get this next section. I began to recall what I had heard of dead men, troubled in their graves by the violation of their last wishes, revisiting the earth to punish the purged and avenge the oppressed. And I thought Mr. Reed's spirit, harassed by the wrongs of his sister's child, might quit its abode, whether in the church vault or in the unknown world of the departed, and rise before me in this chamber. Then, as she's imagining the possibility of this ghost actually visiting her, shaking my hair from my eyes, I lifted my head and tried to look boldly round the dark room. At this moment, a light gleamed on the wall. I thought the swift darting beam was a herald of some coming vision or another world. My heart beat thick. My head grew hot. A sound filled my ears, which I deemed the rushing of wings. Something seemed near me. I was oppressed, suffocated. Endurance broke down. I uttered a wild, involuntary cry. I rushed to the door and shook the lock in desperate effort. Steps came running along the outer passage. The key turned. Bessie and Abbott entered. People come to sort of rescue her as they hear her panicking in the Red Room, but they end up just locking her back in there. They dismiss her panic as hysteria. Violence is a word that they use. And the chapter closes with her actually losing consciousness as she has some sort of fit, almost epileptic. Gilbert points out that this incident in the Red Room serves as a sort of paradigm, a repeating pattern that structures the rest of the book of imprisonment followed by escape. So now, because Jane pretty much got everybody pretty pissed off, Mrs. Reed decides to send Jane off to a girls' boarding school called Lowood. But pretty significantly, Jane doesn't let Mrs. Reed get off scot-free without letting her know exactly what she thinks of her. Jane says, "I am glad you are no relation of mine. I will never call you aunt again as long as I live. I will never come to see you when I am grown up. And if anyone asks me how I liked you and how you treated me, I will say the very thought of you makes me sick, and that you treated me with miserable cruelty. How dare you affirm that, Jane Eyre? How dare I misread? How dare I? Because it is the truth. You think I have no feelings, and that I can do without one bit of love or kindness, but I cannot live so, and you have no pity. I shall remember how you thrust me back, roughly and violently thrust me back into the Red Room, and locked me up there to my dying day, though I was in agony, though I cried out, while suffocating with distress, have mercy, Aunt Reed. And that punishment you made me suffer, because your wicked boy struck me, knocked me down for nothing. I will tell anybody who asks me questions this exact tale. People think you a good woman, but you are bad, hard-hearted. You are deceitful.
You're a and you are nothing.
These kinds of speeches, I think, must have been a big reason why Jane Eyre got so much attention in its day. How many young women must have wanted to tell off their mean stepmothers or their mean sisters or whatever? They want to just tell them exactly what they thought. This must have been a huge catharsis for those uptight, repressed Victorian women who just wanted to express themselves. This is my favorite and the most political aspect of the book. It's asserting not only that women have a voice, but that what they have to say might not make you feel very good. Anyway, so she gets to Lowood, and it's terrible, it's cold and disease-ridden and fascistically structured, so that there's absolutely no time in the day. Every minute of their lives is accounted for. It's ruled over by an oppressive schoolmaster named Mr. Brocklehurst. But it's not all bad. At this Lowood school, Jane makes two really significant friends, Miss Temple and Helen Burns. Each of these women represent a model of 19th century Victorian femininity that Jane will eventually come to reject. Just after she meets Helen Burns, we get this passage when she witnesses Helen Burns being punished in front of the rest of the school. The only marked event of that afternoon was that I saw the girl with whom I had conversed in the veranda, dismissed in disgrace by Miss Scatchard from a history class, and sent to stand in the middle of a large schoolroom. The punishment seemed to me, in a high degree, ignominious. Ignominious?
Ignominious.
Ignominious. Especially for so great a girl. She looked 13 or upwards. I expected she would show signs of great distress and shame, but to my surprise, she neither wept nor blushed. Composed, though grave, she stood, the central mark of all eyes. How can she bear it so quietly, so firmly, I asked of myself. Were I in her place, it seems to me I should wish the earth to open and swallow me up. She looks as if she were thinking of something beyond her punishment, beyond her situation, of something not round her nor before her. I have heard of daydreams. Is she in a daydream now? Her eyes are fixed on the floor, but I am sure they do not see it. Her sight seems turned in, gone down into her heart. She is looking at what she can remember, I believe, not at what is really present. I wonder what sort of a girl she is, whether good or naughty. Here, what Jane seems to admire and even be jealous of in Helen Burns is her ability to bear suffering by turning inward, to bear misery through internal escape. Jane laments her ability to do the same thing, but what we come to admire in Jane is her outspokenness and her ability to demand things of a world that believes that it doesn't owe her anything. Take this passage where Jane rejects Helen Burns's philosophy of ascetic Christian resignation. You are good to those who are good to you. It is all I ever desire to be. If people were always kind and obedient to those who are cruel and unjust, the wicked people would have it all their own way. They would never feel afraid, and so they would never alter, but would grow worse and worse. When we are struck at without a reason, we should strike back, again very hard. I am sure we should. So hard as to teach the person who struck us never to do it again. This philosophy, I think, resonates much more with modern-day feminist sensibilities. The other surrogate mother that Jane meets at Lowood is named Miss Temple, another model of Victorian Christian resignation. Miss Temple had always something of serenity in her air, of state in her mien, of refined propriety in her language, which precluded deviation into the ardent, the excited, the eager. Something which chastened the pleasure of those who looked on her and listened to her, by a controlling sense of awe, and such was my feeling now. Her name is even suggestive of a kind of religious contemplation, meditation, that kind of thing. Gilbert argues that Temple embodies that impossible Victorian ideal, the woman as angel in the house. At one point, Miss Temple says to Helen and Jane, "God bless you, my children." And for a moment, we get the feeling that Jane has finally found her family. Unfortunately, Charlotte Brontë, mercilessly wielding the Grim Reaper's scythe, kills Helen Burns as she dies of consumption as disease sweeps through all of the Lowood schoolhouse. In some of her dying words, Helen Burns says, "I am very happy, Jane, and when you hear that I am dead, you must be sure and not grieve. There is nothing to grieve about. We all must die one day, and the illness which is removing me is not painful. It is gentle and gradual. My mind is at rest. I leave no one to regret me much. I have only a father, and he is lately married and will not miss me. By dying young, I shall escape great sufferings. I had not qualities or talents to make my way very well in the world. I should have been continually at fault." From the death of Helen Burns, we jump way forward in time to where Jane is 18. She's been teaching for about 2 years at Lowood School now, and Miss Temple has even left Jane behind because she got married. So it's looking like time for Jane Eyre to find her way out of there. So she puts out some advertisements for herself and her skills and gets hired by Miss Fairfax to be the governess at Thornfield. Oh boy, Thornfield, this is where the magic happens. Get ready to rip those bodices, ladies, because here comes Mr. Rochester. So Jane goes to Thornfield on the pretense of tutoring Mr. Rochester's ward, a French girl named Adele. A lot of her dialogue is actually also written in French, which is pretty annoying. If you don't speak French, you don't really know what they're talking about. So a little pretentious of you, Charlotte Brontë, I might say, making us go to the footnotes and read what you said in French. Not appreciated. So Jane's living there for a while and she starts to kind of feel a little bit bored. "I valued what was good in Mrs. Fairfax," she says, "and what was good in Adele, but I believed in the existence of other, more vivid kinds of goodness, and what I believed in, I wished to behold." This reflection then prompts some guilt on her part. She asks the reader, "Who blames me?" But that guilt quickly gives way to classic Jane Eyre-ish defiance. "It is in vain to say human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility. They must have action. They will make it if they cannot find it. Millions are condemned to a stiller doom than mine, and millions are in silent revolt against their lot. Nobody knows how many rebellions besides political rebellions ferment in the masses of life which people the earth. Women are supposed to be very calm generally, but women feel just as men feel. They need exercise for their faculties, and a field for their efforts as much as their brothers do. They suffer from too rigid a restraint, too absolute a stagnation, precisely as men would suffer, and it is narrow-minded in their more privileged fellow creatures to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings, to playing on the piano and embroidering bags. It is thoughtless to condemn them or laugh at them if they seek to do more or learn more than custom has pronounced necessary for their sex." Now, what event, what excitement comes to relieve Jane's ennui? A man. Mr. Rochester's entrance to the novel is characteristically Gothic. He is a Byronic hero, and so gets a very moody and sort of mythical entrance. One day, while Jane is going for a walk to deliver some post in the near town, she hears a horse coming down the road. As this horse approached, and as I watched for it to appear through the dusk, I remembered certain of Bessie's tales wherein figured a north of England spirit called a Gytrash? Gitrish? Which in the form of a horse, mule, or large dog haunted solitary ways and sometimes came upon belated travelers, as this horse was now coming upon me. This little narrative technique, Gilbert suggests, is significant because it mythologizes the entrance of male sexuality, therefore rendering Jane's rebelliousness against that sexuality mythological as well. As Rochester says later on, "When you came on me in Hay Lane last night, I thought unaccountably of fairy tales, and had half a mind to demand whether you had bewitched my horse. I am not sure yet." In Rochester's entrance, this mythological, Byronic picture of masculinity is immediately undercut, though, as Rochester falls off of his horse. He sort of grumpily demands that Jane help him out as he kind of hurt his leg, and etc., etc. So Rochester comes to now live at Thornfield, where he was absent, I guess, in Europe before that. And the story proceeds with a series of encounters between Jane and Rochester as they get to know each other, exchange witty dialogue that includes a little bit of one-upmanship and chiding, and it's all very fun. Through these dialogue scenes, Brontë shows us that their romantic interaction is far from the typical unbalanced power dynamic whereby the wealthy, older statesman falls in love with his young, impressionable, perhaps naive governess. Instead, there's an equality between them. Jane asserts herself as Rochester's equal. And then to Rochester's credit, that assertion actually just makes her more attractive to him. Their sexual tension and these back and forths make up a large section of the middle portion of this book. And after a while, it becomes pretty clear that these two cuties are in love with each other. But unfortunately, prudence and the realities of the society in which they live would have it that Rochester gets married to a woman named Mrs. Ingram, who is much more of a standard picture of what a Victorian lady ought to look like and how she ought to behave and what kind of family she ought to belong to. Miss Ingram is just a much more standard and sensible pick for Rochester. But, you know, the heart wants what the heart wants, and the tension between Rochester and Jane grows and grows and grows until it finally bursts in this scene where they're out in the garden and Jane is threatening to leave. She's like, there's nothing for me here. I can't stand being around you, but I also, I love you, basically. And we get this epic speech from Jane. "I tell you I must go," I retorted, roused to something like passion. "Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? Do you think I am an automaton? A machine without feeling? And can bear to have my morsel of bread snatched from my lips and my drop of living water dashed from my cup? Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it as hard for you to leave me as it is now for me to leave you. I am not talking to you now through the medium of custom conventionalities, nor even of mortal flesh. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave and we stood at God's feet equal, as we are. As we are, repeated Mr. Rochester. So, he added, enclosing me in his arms, gathering me to his breast, pressing his lips on my lips. So, Jane. Woo! Oh boy. They kissed. Anyway, so they kiss, they end up together. The end, right? Nope. Not with this book. See, there's a little element to this book that I haven't even mentioned yet. The spooky element. The whole time that this romance has been brewing between Jane and Rochester, there's been dark elements lurking in the shadows of Thornfield. 2 episodes in particular build up this mystery. In the first one, Jane is trying to sleep and she hears this spooky laugh come from outside of her door, and she investigates and finds that Mr. Rochester's bed is on fire, and he kind of brushes it off and goes into the attic and talks to the servant woman who lives up there named Grace Poole, So that's weird, but then that kind of gets dropped. And then a second thing happens when an old friend of Mr. Rochester's comes to visit, and then he gets bitten in the night as if by a vampire or a zombie or something like that. And again, Rochester kind of brushes that off. He's like, don't worry about it, I got it handled, I know what happened. It was probably Grace Poole. Jane's kind of going crazy, like, how is Rochester letting this crazy woman live in the attic? That doesn't make any sense. And Grace Poole is acting like she doesn't even know what she did. So anyway, that mystery just kind of lurks in the middle of the book for a long time. The final and third event to really build up this mystery happens after Rochester and Jane have decided to be together. He dumps that other girl, and they decide that they're going to get married. And Jane sort of awakens from this dream and sees something in her room. So she's describing what happened to Mr. Rochester, and he's trying to sort of play it off. On waking, a gleam dazzled my eyes. I thought, oh, it is daylight, but I was mistaken. It was only candlelight. Sophie, I supposed, had come in. There was a light in the dressing table and the door of the closet where before going to bed I had hung my wedding dress and veil. It stood open. I heard a rustling there. I asked, Sophie, what are you doing? No one answered, but a form emerged from the closet. It took the light, held it aloft, and surveyed the garments pendant from the portmanteau. Sophie, Sophie, I cried again, and still it was silent. I had risen up in bed. I bent forward. First surprise, then bewilderment came over me, and then my blood crept cold through my veins. Mr. Rochester, this was not Sophie. It was not Lee. It was not Mrs. Fairfax. It was not. No, I was sure of it. I am still. It was not even that strange woman, Grace Poole. It seemed, sir, a woman tall and large, with thick and dark hair hanging down her back. I know not what dress she had on. It was white and straight, but whether gown, sheet, or shroud, I cannot tell. Did you see her face? Not at first, but presently she took my veil from its place. She held it up, gazed at it long, and then she threw it over her own head and turned to the mirror. At that moment, I saw the reflection of the visage and features quite distinctly in the dark oblong glass. And how were they? Fearful and ghastly to me. Oh, sir, I never saw a face like it. It was a discolored face. It was a savage face. I wish I could forget the roll of the red eyes and the fearful, blackened inflation of the lineaments. Ghosts are usually pale, Jane. This, sir, was purple. The lips were swelled and dark, the brow furrowed, the black eyebrows widely raised over the bloodshot eyes. Shall I tell you of what it reminded me? You may. Of the foul German spectre, the vampire. Now, at this point, I was going, oh, sick, vampires. Jane Eyre's a vampire book. Who knew? Let's bring it on. I'm ready for the vampires. Let's go full supernatural. We've been hinting at this gothic supernatural thing the whole book. Let's go whole hog. I am ready for vampires. But no, we end up finding out later that that woman was actually Rochester's first wife, who went insane, and he keeps her locked in the attic. So there's a lot that's really interesting about this, but none of it really makes Charlotte Brontë look very good these days. Rochester's wife's name is Bertha, it turns out, and when Jane first describes her, the Penguin paperback classics edition gives us a kind of helpful little footnote that's interesting. Bertha's description evokes the complexion of a black person, but also the facial attributes considered appropriate to the maniac. The black, dark, and purple apparition of the attacker, with swelled lips and bloodshot eyes, seems to imply an eliding of these two conventions, especially in view of the use of the word savage. However, the purple and distended features may also be read as an emblem of rage. Mrs. Rochester is consumed by ire at the usurpation of her rights. When Jane looks in the mirror, she sees this face in place of hers, implying unconscious identification between the two. Later on, the woman is also described as a Creole, and that Rochester and her had met in the Americas. Creole is a frustratingly ambiguous term. These days, it's used to refer to languages spoken mostly like Haitian Creole, for example, which is a combination of African and French dialects, or there's Louisiana Creole, a mixture of French and English, and Creole in general can refer to any mixture of languages, but at this time, it could have been a racial category, or it could have referred to white European folks that were born and living in the Americas. There's even a whole book, a prequel to Jane Eyre, which I learned about after reading this book, written by Jean Rhys, called The Wide Sargasso Sea, and it's all told from Bertha's perspective. It sounds pretty interesting, and I think I'll definitely be checking that out. So it felt to me a little bit like Charlotte Brontë was kind of forgetting Bertha's humanity. She kind of exists only as an obstacle to Jane's progress, to marrying Mr. Rochester, and she's not, her feelings or her story are not really considered. She's just the insane woman in the attic, and that's it. And further to the point that Bertha is not so much a character, but a symbol or a plot point, Gilbert argues that Bertha is actually a psychological symbol or manifestation of Jane's dread and desire to put off the wedding. Gilbert says, disliking the vapory veil of Jane Rochester, Jane Eyre wants to tear it up. Bertha does it for her. Fearing the inexorable bridal day, Jane would like to put it off. Bertha does that for her too. Bertha, in other words, is Jane's truest and darkest double. Another interpretation might be that Bertha's madness is itself a result of marriage, and that Mr. Rochester might have driven her insane via the wifely expectations that Jane has railed against earlier in the book. That last one seems kind of doubtful, especially considering the way that the book ends. But before we get there, Jane, overcome with embarrassment and shame, decides that she has to leave Thornfield, and she disappears into the night. Once again, repeating her experience in the Red Room of imprisonment and escape. So soon after leaving Thornfield, Jane finds herself without any money or any food. She was riding in a coach for a while, but they kicked her out because she's got no money and she's got no food, and she basically almost dies out there on the road. As she's sort of reaching rock bottom, she finds a house, goes and knocks on the door and begs them for aid, and eventually they decide to help her out. We find out that living in the house are these gals, Hannah, Mary, and Diana. They also live with their brother, St. John. Not actually pronounced St. John. I don't really know how to pronounce it, so we're just gonna go with St. John, okay? St. John eventually embraces her as well, deciding to help her out and offering her a job. But funny thing happens. Yep, you might have guessed it. St. John ends up falling in love with Jane. Not so plain after all, Miss Jane. St. John is a relatively severe character, kind of dour and serious. He eventually proposes to her and even comes up with this crazy scheme that they're gonna both go to India on a religious mission to try and spread the good word of God. But of course, we all know that Jane is still really carrying a torch for Mr. Rochester. Not to mention the fact that she's pretty sure that this trip to India is gonna kill them both. Jane, once again feeling pressure thrust unfairly upon her, feels caught between wanting to please St. John, but also wanting to honor herself and her own self-determination. I daily wished more to please him, but to do so I felt daily more and more that I must disown half of my nature. She suggests to him that she would go on the condition that they don't get married and that they go as brother and sister. But of course, that idea doesn't really go over very well. I too, St. John says, do not want a sister. A sister might any day be taken from me. I want a wife, the sole helpmeet I can influence efficiently in life and retain absolutely till death. It's occurring to me now, really, I mean, what he really wants is to imprison her. This marriage to St. John is prison. A prison that goes beyond this life. A prison beyond death. a religious prison. Anyway, he gets so insistent on this idea that they get married that he ends up chasing Jane away. Jane, you would not repent marrying me. Be certain of that. We must be married. I repeat it, there is no other way, and undoubtedly enough of love would follow upon marriage to render the union right, even in your eyes. I scorn your idea of love. I could not help saying, as I rose up and stood before him, leaning my back against the rock. I scorn the counterfeit sentiment you offer. Yes, St. John, and I scorn you when you offer it. St. John's rebuke for this is he says that rejecting him is tantamount to rejecting God, equating her insistence to determine her own destiny as essentially heresy. She's a heretic for not wanting to marry him. John's insistence is so powerful, he almost breaks Jane. She almost marries the guy. Just as she's about to give in and say, fine, I'll marry you, something very strange happens. She hears Rochester's voice echo through the wind or something. Rochester's voice was calling to her from beyond. I wanted yet 2 hours of breakfast time. I filled the interval in walking softly about my room and pondering the visitation which had given my plans their present bent. I recalled that inward sensation I had experienced, for I could recall it with all its unspeakable strangeness. I recalled the voice I had heard. Again, I questioned whence it came. As vainly as before, it seemed in me, not in the external world. I asked, was it a mere nervous impression, a delusion? I could not conceive or believe it. It was more like an inspiration. A wondrous shock of feeling had come like the earthquake which shook the foundations of Paul and Silas's prison. It had opened the doors of the soul's cell and loosened its bands. It had wakened it out of its sleep, whence it sprang trembling, listening aghast. Then vibrated thrice a cry on my startled ear, and in my quaking heart and through my spirit, which neither feared nor shook, but exulted as if in joy over the success of one effort it had been privileged to make, independent of the cumbrous body. And so, in Jane's final reenactment of her escape from the Red Room, she flees Marsh End and heads to find Mr. Rochester at Thornfield. But along the way, she learns that Thornfield was actually destroyed. A fire was set, and we learn that Bertha had set fire to Thornfield and threw herself from the roof and died. In the fire, Rochester also ended up blind and crippled. She finds him at Ferndean, a house on the old property. They reunite, and they get married. The end. What we see in the end is that Jane is able to finally achieve that equality with Rochester, partially because of his injured state. The fact that he's blind and now lame, she has even more power in that dynamic, because now he's going to need her to take care of him. I gotta admit, I was a little bit disappointed by this ending. I had expected that Jane, in a final rebellious triumph, would realize that she doesn't actually need marriage, that she would commit to this idea of marriage as a trap, and would sort of learn to live with herself, by herself. In that ending, she would really live up to this quote that she says earlier in the book: the more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself. I suppose I was expecting something a little bit more radical. And especially when you consider that also earlier in the book, she ends up inheriting her family's wealth. So her ultimate spiritual culmination seems to lie in ascending to the aristocratic class and firmly marrying into it. In the end, the key to happiness is money and a man. But I suppose it would have been a pretty disappointing and sad ending if she just decided to live alone and poor and be a teacher for the rest of her life. I don't know, maybe that would have been disappointing. And in the end, Jane Eyre is a Gothic novel, meaning a popular novel of the 19th century, and a big reason for its existence is to entertain and to titillates. And Jane Eyre is certainly engaging and titillating and entertaining. And the fact that it has a radical feminist vision for itself as well on top of its entertainment really makes this book a masterpiece. So anyway, that's all my thoughts on Jane Eyre. Let me know what you think about it. Did you read it? Did you like it? Let me know in the comments below if you agree with me. There's only like 10 of you guys that are watching this video, so leave a comment. Come on, don't be a stranger. I'm out here working my ass off over here. What else did you think? What'd you think about Bertha? Have you read The Wide Sargasso Sea? What's up with that Bertha business? Throw me a like, it's a tiny channel. Let's get this thing going, and until next time, I will see you later.